Welcome to another video. Tonight we have 12 stories, from stories involving odd jobs with odd outcomes, to stories of possessed stop signs and more. If you have a story of your own, it can be sent to reddit.com/r/slumberreads. These videos do take me quite a bit of time to create, so if you're feeling generous, and if you feel this video is worth one, please be sure to drop a like rating. It helps the channel more than most think. Subscribing if you're new is also greatly appreciated. We are getting pretty close to 100,000 subscribers. Enjoy the video, and as always, I hope you all have a great night. I was a fool to think that this job was just a job. Everything from the advertisement to going and actually applying was way too trivial and inviting. I'm trying to tell myself that I'm going to be okay, but I just don't know. I have some time before it happens, so I'll try to explain how fucked I am. In light of the pandemic that's been around for more than a year at this point, I was extremely tight on money. Having moved out of my parents' house right before Corona started shutting down businesses and any possible sources of income for me was bad enough, but being a college student on top of that was absolutely not helping my case. For the longest time, after leaving California, I lived in one of those $15 a night, ran down motels while attending ASU, and living was undeniably a struggle. Cheap housing was fine. I could tolerate the dank and stained mattresses provided in the rooms. Granted, I had been smart enough to take some washable sheets and comforters, as well as Febreze from home. I probably washed those daily because of how hot it'd get in those old, barely ventilated rooms. The real problem came from the crime. In the city of Tempe, Arizona, there were almost 1,000 cases of burglary in the year 2019 alone. Now, granted at the time, the stat didn't scare me because I thought I'd be living in the dorms on campus. So me as a high school senior thought nothing of it, but here I am. 4 nights before I ended up in my current situation, there was a case of breaking and entering reported from the floor under mine. Someone was apparently abducted and had literally everything taken. The only items that remained were their toothbrush, still neatly placed by the sink of the small bathroom attached to the main room, and the key to the room, which had the name of the person staying there scribbled onto the paper tab. Even their bed sheets were taken, strangely enough. Maybe criminals needed hostages and clean bed sheets. Needless to say, that was enough motivation for me to start making some better financial decisions. I went through 4 job interviews over the course of the next 3 days. I was turned down by all 4. They said I lacked intuition. Yesterday morning, however, I came across a neatly organized advertisement online from a company by the name of MORD. The bold font stood out from my computer screen, detailing no experience required, great pay, call for interview. From the other advertisements I was looking at, I chose to pursue this one. I felt almost as if it was calling to me, or maybe it was beckoning my bank account. I called there, and then, after a few rings of the dial tone, the sound of a young woman came through. "Hello there. Are you calling about the job advertisements we put out recently?" She asked gingerly. "Oh, hey, yeah, actually I am. I would, like to schedule an interview for later today?" I stumbled with my words. At times I find it hard to talk to people, and the quarantine was not helping me by any less socially awkward. "Is that alright?" I asked cautiously. "Oh, eager are we now? That's no problem. Can I have your name? It's for filing purposes." She responded, clicking keys on her keyboard. She responded quickly. It somehow made my brain tick, but I ignored it as best as I could. "Yeah, It'll be Jason Brody. Fabulous. I could practically feel that woman smirking at me. The best of the phone call was somewhat uneventful. I was told the job was hosted in a town somewhat far away from Temp. For your own safety, I won't tell you which town. I was told I could show up to their facility around 8 p.m. This left me the rest of the day to contemplate my decision. I'd somehow just then realized I didn't even ask what I would be doing at the job. I didn't ask for the girl's name either. Come to think of it, I have never heard of a company by the name of MORD owning such a big plot of land out where they were located. What did MORD even stand for? At that point, I couldn't care any less. I had dollar signs waving in my face, so I hastily went for it. Too bad, so sad, I thought as I went to prepare for later. I gathered the best clothes I could and took the evening bus to a stop relatively close to the property. Their facility was sizable, reminiscent of an office building, situated out away from everything. It was essentially a desert out here, even though the more urban areas were probably 45 minutes away. Still, there were some buildings scattered out along the road. MORD's, however, was strangely pronounced. Compared to the other dusty buildings, this one looked weirdly clean and pristine in the evening sun. As I got to the front entrance of the building, I was greeted with the reception area. The walls were painted in a bright and reflective shade of white, with black trim which met a marvelous red carpet with black and white patterns etched into it. It reminded me of a casino show floor. In the mostly empty and spacious room were some white leather couches, some pillars spread equally across the expanse of the room, and some houseplants in the corners. A young, blonde girl worked the front desk. "Mr. Brody, I presume?" called the girl. "Yeah, I'm here. You must be who I spoke with earlier?" I responded, doing my best not to stutter. Although the girl's facial features were hidden by a blue surgical mask, she seemed pleasant. Her nameplate read, Anna. Not even a last name. "Alright. If you walk down that hall over here, it'll be the first room to the right." She pointed her finger to a hallway to the right of me. "Much thanks," I replied. By her voice, I assumed she was probably in her early 20s, probably working some lame job to gather money, similar to how I was. Inside of the room was a wooden desk and some chairs. The decorative pattern of the lobby also seemed to flow into office rooms as well. On the desk laid a piece of paper and an envelope. Cautiously, I took up the paper. It read, MORD. Insert address here. Room 2. "Good evening, Jason. It is truly unfortunate that I couldn't see you in person before you start. As you should know by now, you will be working overnight in our facility as an overnight guard. As mentioned in the advertisement, the pay should be satisfactory. You will receive $1,500 per working night. If you couldn't tell by my phrasing, you have already been hired. You will start tonight. Your job is quite easy as long as you follow the company rules. The envelope next to this page should contain said rules. Failure to comply with these rules may lead to unforeseen consequences for you, so be sure to work diligently. Your uniform can be found on the chair behind you in the corner. You will find your post for tonight using the map of the building provided on the back of this page. Be at your post by 11:30 p.m. tonight. You may spend the time leading up to your shift in any way you'd like. Do not go down the stairs. Aaron." I laughed at the last comment. Way to be ominous, I thought. It was about 8 p.m. then, so I decided to get some rest in before my shift. I slept in the chair, where I had originally picked up my uniform. The pay was enough to cover my tuition in a matter of weeks. No way I was turning back. My alarm rang at 11:20 p.m. I shot up, put on my uniform, and followed the detailed fire escape route map of the building to my post. Aaron had kindly used a red marker to guide me through the hallways. I arrived at my post by 11:26 p.m., just enough time for me to take a quick glance at the rules. I figured that since I'd been hired on the spot, I was in no rush to fret over these. The paper contained a list of 14 rules. The first rules were modest. Rule 1. From a time period of 11:30 p.m. to the end of your shift at 6 a.m., you must walk the ground floor's perimeter twice. You may choose the intervals at which these patrols happen. Easy. Rule 2. From a time period of 2 a.m. to 3:33 a.m., you must take a patrol of the second floor. Walking the perimeter suffices as a patrol. Oddly specific. Rule 3. You will also be tasked with observing the CCTV cameras stationed around the building. If you observe anything you would consider abnormal, please use the phone in your room to contact the front desk. They will know what to do. Connection number 999. I sighed. It's whatever, I thought. Must be some new guy hazing ritual. Reminds me of when my old burger joint used to decorate for Halloween. Oddly spooky. I laughed internally. Maybe they're just reusing some old supplies from Halloween. It's March, though. I shrugged it off. Taking a look at my watch, it was now 11:30. I was officially on the clock. Looking up, I observed the room I had been stationed in. In contrast with other rooms on the first floor, the red carpet that had been present throughout the greater part of the building did not go past the doorframe. Rather, this room had a bleak gray carpet, a color reminiscent of wet concrete. The walls of this room were a faded white. Numerous maroon stains laid in contrast from the color of the wall. Some long stains even followed onto the ceiling. Exactly across from the metal door was an industrial metal table. On the table sat 12 monitors, stacked 4 by 3. Next to the pile laid a beige office phone. On the corner, in the room to my right, were 4 blue lockers. In the other corner of the room there was a small yellow bin, with something black inside of it. Classy. Flipping around, I decided to go out for my first patrol right off the bat. I took the envelope with the rules and kept reading. Rule 4. For your own safety, before exiting your room for a patrol, look through all of the camera feeds, then refer to Rule 3. Well, shit. I found it almost comical that this company was talking about my safety. After all, aren't I supposed to be the most dangerous thing in the building? I'm pretty sure I saw a baton in the bin. I didn't grab it, though. Found it funny how I kept messing up. Legitimately comical. Rule 5. While on patrol, you might encounter rooms where the doors are open and people are seemingly moving inside, but the lights inside the room are turned off. Do not enter these rooms. Do not shine your flashlight in these rooms. They don't like light. I stopped dead in my tracks, almost falling over with how hard I planted my feet into the ground. I read the rule over 2 more times thinking I misinterpreted it or something. I started to feel the creeping sensation of fear enter my body. Logically, this had to be a prank. It had to. I had too many thoughts to portray onto this note, but I kept reading. Rule 6. If you are on patrol and you encounter one of these rooms, and something seems to be exiting the room, do not look at it. If you must, stare at the ground and walk backwards until you can turn around and get back to your room quickly. Refer to Rule 3 before finishing that round of patrol. Rule 7. If you are in your room and you hear scratching at your door, almost as if a pet were beckoning to be let in, do not open the door. If the scratches intensify, you must ignore them. Do not attempt to look out the small window in the door. It is best if you keep your back to the door. Rule 8. If you notice that one of the cameras in your room has gone black or has started to show static, you must take the baton that was provided to you and smash the screen of the monitor. It can get in otherwise. Try to smash only the screen. The top of the monitor frame is labeled accordingly to where the camera was displaying. You must avoid that area whenever patrolling. Rule 9. If you sense something is following you, run into your room. Chances are it can't get past the door. Rule 10. If something manages to break into your room, remain completely and utterly still wherever you are and drop whatever you are doing. Do not open your eyes. It will try to coerce you. Rule 11. At no point before 6 a.m. should you consider leaving the premises of the building. You are locked in for your safety. I sharply inhaled upon the realization that I was locked in. This was undeniably the fastest my heart has ever beat. I was practically gagging on my own tongue. I wanted to say something to calm myself down, but couldn't find the words. I managed to get a hold of myself soon after, until the ground floor's lights shut off. I was surrounded by darkness. I stumbled backwards a few steps to find the wall of the hallway. I was utterly blinded by the darkness. I fumbled with the utility belt of my uniform, trying to find which small pocket housed a flashlight. I got a hold of it after a moment, switched it on, and all I could think to do was look around me. Wide-eyed, I turned several 360s before considering taking a step forward to trudge onward. The lights must be on a timer, I thought. Shining my light into my black analog watch, the time read 11:40 p.m. This is absolutely terrible. As subtle as a mouse, I creeped onward. In a foot race, an ant probably could have beat me to the end of the hallway. I hadn't realized it before, but this building was quite expansive. In each hallway, there seemed to be doorways to at least 25 rooms total, and the hallways were probably each 150 feet long. The building was laid out like a grid, with hallways connecting at certain intervals every now and then, making it easy to navigate since there were all right angles. Having not encountered anything for the first 10 minutes of creeping, I quickened my pace to a slow walk. Surprisingly, I made a complete perimeter of the ground floor in about 45 minutes, while not having seen anything. Perhaps it's because I didn't dare to make a sound or look at anything but the hallway in front of me, but I made it back to my room safe. I peered around the room. Nothing seemed to be hiding inside. Stepping in, I closed the door behind me. My watch read 12:44 a.m. Suddenly, the office phone on the table blared its ringtone. Almost stumbling over from a heart attack, I inched closer to the phone. I put my hand on the handle and held the speaker to my ear. The voice of a man came through. "Hello, how are you?" asked the man in a deep and slow voice. It's good. Who are you?" Ignoring my question, the man continued. "What do you believe in?" Static from the phone erupted briefly. Wait, what do you mean?" I was sufficiently flustered. "Like, religion? I'm atheist." There was a brief pause. "What is your name?" asked the man. He sounded cold and lifeless now. There was no inflection left in his voice. His breaths were shallow, like his diaphragm could no longer push enough air out of his mouth. Jason?" The man's voice became distorted past what I could ever possibly try to describe. It was similar to someone choking, or gargling on some thick liquid. It hurt my heart to hear somehow, but it was talking to me through the distortion. I didn't know what it was saying. The phone line cut. It was eerily silent around me now, and then it dinged on me. I whipped the envelope out and scanned the rules for anything mentioning a phone. I read, Rule 13. If the phone in your station begins to ring, you must answer it. Answer any questions it may ask. If it hangs up before you do, resume duties. If it asks for your name, do not answer. Hang up and resume duties. My heart dropped. I really had nothing running through my head right at that moment other than dread. From the silence came a knock at the room's door. I flipped around instantly to face it. Before taking a step forward, I looked at the paper with the rules again. Rule 14. If there is knocking coming from the door to your room, it is most likely the result of not following one of the previously mentioned rules. Refer to Rule 7. If the handle to the door begins to jingle, refer to Rule 10. I looked up to the door. The handle to the door had silently been turning, and I had not noticed. I gasped and dropped the envelope somewhere on the ground from surprise. I instantly shut my eyes and crouched down, trying to find it by feeling the ground. I heard the door start to creak open, its metal hinges squeaking. Planting both hands on the carpet, I prepared for what was about to unfold. What I felt at first was a strange aura. It became seemingly colder inside of the room, but my body remained warm. Strange sensations coated my arms and legs, the kind where it tingles, and you'd expect to find a spider crawling on you, but there's nothing there. My head felt unfathomably hot compared to the other parts of my body. That's when it spoke. Its voice was reminiscent to that of the thing that spoke to me on the phone. However, it was not gargling. It had the same vocal tone as the thing on the phone, but this time it spoke with inflection and an accent. It sounded human. "Hey, it's okay. Open your eyes and come with me." It repeated that phrase several times, and then, almost as if it were perplexed by why I wasn't responding, it started speaking again, this time in German, and then in what I assumed to be Russian, and then in an Asian language I did not recognize. And then it went silent, but the feeling in my body was still present, along with the intense cramping of my muscles. I did not dare open my eyes. I remained in my crouched position for what seemed like an eternity. When the sensations in my body subsided, I finally mustered up the courage to open my eyes. There was no monster, from anything I could see. The door remained wide open. The light that illuminated my small room of salvation spilled into the hallway outside. I shot up and closed the door as quickly and quietly as I could, somehow thinking that it might still be outside somewhere. I don't remember exactly how I felt, but deprived of oxygen from forgetting to breathe is somewhat accurate. I was sweating profusely and trying to get a hold of my breath. My watch read 1:02 a.m. Spotting the envelope on the ground, I bent over and went to review the rules. Glancing over the ones I've already read, I recalled the cameras. Looking to the table, I began to switch on the monitors one by one, with the small on-off button next to the label of where the camera was shooting. All camera feeds displayed seemingly still images of the long dark hallways, except for one which displayed one room in a hallway with the lights on inside. I figured this must have been the camera footage shooting of my hallway, and that illuminated room was the one I was in. The label on the monitor read, Hallway 4, correlating that to the map Aaron had given me. It seems I was mistaken. I was located in Hallway 3. Seeming as none of the rules I had read so far mentioned the lights being on, I looked down to the phone to call the front desk. Before picking up the receiver, I hesitated, almost as if the monster from earlier would start asking questions again, but I dialed 9 3 times, and a dial tone began to sound. And after 3 tones, the voice of a young man came through. "Hello, front desk representative speaking." He spoke with a distinct southern accent. "Hey, well, in hallway number 4, there's a room with a light on." I responded, trying to keep it together. Almost snottily, the man retorted, "Is that truly abnormal? There are consequences for calling this line without a reason." I did not enjoy his tone. "You listen to me. I've seen my fair share of fucking abnormal tonight. Don't you try to tell me." He gave in after my one-sentence verbal assault. "We'll send someone over." However, I don't think that southern ass ever sent anyone. I never saw anyone walk through that hallway for the next 20 minutes. I guess I'll figure it out myself, I thought. Before I left the room, I remembered to grab the baton that sat in the bin in the corner of the room. Opening the door, I peered out, looking left and right as if I were crossing a street, and I headed over to hallway 4. Nothing seemed to be out of place, though. No doors were open, and all the lights remained off. I guess I've made it this far. Might as well do my second patrol. Through the rest of my patrol, I encountered 2 of the rooms described by Rule 5. I heeded the warning to the rule and simply walked past the room without investigating inside. These rooms were truly strange, though. Walking past the room, it sounded similar to the inside of a populated mall or train station, where there was a lot of bustling. I took a quick glance inside one of these rooms as I passed it in the hallway. Through the darkness, I could see movement, but I could not relate it to anything I could comprehend. It had the form of a black mass, swirling around. Moving on, I walked down a flight of stairs, figuring I'd do an extra good job and continue onward. Everything seemed darker down there, but it was reminiscent of a copy of the ground floor from what I could remember. My feet made a small squishing sound while walking. The floor seemed to be slightly flooded by a thin layer of water. I felt like I had bad night blindness down there. My flashlight seemed to be losing power as well, or something to that extent, because the beam dimmed the further I walked. It smelled old, rotting wood, and rusty metal. It was also quite humid, like an indoor swimming pool. Felt some of the water from the ground soak my running shoes. My hands were starting to get clammy, and the air seemed to get heavier with each step, compressing my chest, making it hard to breathe. I looked at my watch. It seemed to have stopped working as well. The time remained frozen at 1:07 a.m., but I knew it was way later than that. I stopped where I was and leaned against one of the hallway's walls. Pulling out the envelope, I gazed upon the rules. Rule 12 was quite vague. Rule 12. You are always being deceived. Remember. This left me quite confused. I flipped over the rules paper. Written in a pronounced bold font sat Rule 15. Rule 15. Do not go down the stairs. A basement floor does not exist on this building. Upon descending the stairs, your safety cannot be guaranteed. In fact, our company does not know exactly what happens upon descending the stairs. We only know the result. Thus, we do not yet understand how to effectively combat this. You have a limited amount of time to pray to your deity of choice because you have just entered a portal to the 4th circle of hell. Signed, M.O.R.D. I felt my legs give out a little. I, looking to the darkness ahead of me, behind me, and all around me, I yelled from fear and backtracked as fast as I could. I jumped up 3 stairs at a time and hauled absolute ass back to my room. I ripped the lockers in the corner of the room from the wall and barricaded the door. I already tried redialing the phone. No one picked up. I don't know what's approaching me, but I can feel it. It's different than the creature which knocked on the door. My body is in pain, aching and writhing, burning. I can sense it, and it can sense me. It's coming to take me. I can see it in my head, dark and disfigured, eyeless, pale, soulless, and satanic. I am scared. I don't know what to do. I don't understand why I'm here. I don't understand why this is happening to me. Please, whoever may be reading my warning, if you ever agree to a job that seems too good to be true, it is. It was a late July night, and I once again found myself basking in the glow of my TV screen, controller in one hand and a beer in the other. Empty pizza boxes, chip bags, and a variety of other discarded remnants surrounded me as I fought battle after battle in the latest RPG I had picked up a few days prior. As a depressed loner with no friends, most of my nights were spent this way. To be blunt, I hated myself. I hated my shitty convenience store cashier job, and I hated my sad excuse for a life. My whole existence was based on going to work at a job I despised and coming home to vigorously try to escape my reality. It was a sad routine, but one that allowed me the luxury of not having to face the realization that my life was going nowhere. After a few hours had passed, and I was good and inebriated, I headed outside to the landing to smoke a cigarette. It was a bad habit, I know, but when you don't have much to live for, the dangers of cigarettes seem frivolous and unimportant. I had just finished lighting up when I instantly noticed something strange. The stop sign that was usually posted at the intersection next to my apartment building had moved. I've lived in the apartment complex for over 5 years, and the same red, octagonal stop sign that had always been next to the intersection was now posted on the sidewalk adjacent to the building. A laugh escaped from my mouth as I realized it must have been some kind of prank. I didn't know much about the law, but I knew enough to know that moving a stop sign was definitely illegal, and whoever had moved it was going to get their ass thrown in jail if they were caught. But whatever. It wasn't my problem. Someone would move it back eventually, I thought as I took a drag from my cigarette. After gaming for another hour, I decided to call it a night and get to bed. I had to be up early for work the next day, and although I was dreading it, I hated feeling tired on the job. I awoke in the morning feeling strangely nervous, like a wave of anxiety had suddenly washed over me. I laid on my air mattress, staring up at the water stains on the ceiling as I thought about how my life wasn't going the way I wanted it to go. I remember how I used to have goals and ambition. There was a time in my life when I wanted to be a veterinarian because of my love for animals. I even went to college for it, but a few missed classes here and a few bad grades there, and all of a sudden, I found myself dropping out. Now I'm a single, 39-year-old college dropout who spends his free time trying to escape reality through video games and alcohol. Was I ever going to get my shit together and actually pursue something meaningful in my life? Or was I doomed to slowly wither into oblivion, having never even come close to my true potential as a human being? I could feel my air mattress deflate a bit as I lay there deciding if I should even bother going into work. I thought about just getting into my car and driving somewhere far away. Somewhere where I could start over and reignite the passion I once felt for life. With a defeated sigh, I got up to get ready for work. I was on the patio having a smoke before heading off when I noticed the stop sign I had seen on the sidewalk the night before was gone. Figuring someone had moved it back to its rightful place, I put out my cigarette and began descending the stairs to my car. I was just about at the bottom of the stairs when I looked up and was suddenly taken aback. The stop sign was now posted at the bottom of the stairs. Slowly walking over to it, I saw that it was stuck firmly into the concrete. The signpost didn't even budge when I shook it, as if whoever put it there had used something impressively fast-drying cement. If this was a prank, then someone had gone to great lengths to pull it off. A smile formed on my face as I contemplated the absolute absurdity of it. Whoever was going to have to chisel this out of the concrete was probably going to be super pissed. But, again, it wasn't my problem. I walked to my car smiling and shaking my head. Maybe whoever did it was caught on camera. Or maybe not. At any rate, I was sure it would be moved by the time I got back. Work was especially shitty that day. There seemed to be an unusually high amount of irate customers that would yell at me for stupid reasons like how we didn't carry a specific brand of potato chips, or how we were out of their favorite scratcher. The day dragged on painfully, and by the end of my shift, I was so ready to get back to my apartment to roam through the hills and forests of my game while drinking myself into a coma. The dim light in the sky was quickly fading to night as I pulled up to my apartment building. I sat for a few minutes, finishing a cigarette before exiting my car and making my way over to the stairs leading up to my apartment. Immediately I noticed the stop sign that had been there earlier was gone. I looked to see if it had left a hole in the concrete in the spot where it had been posted, but to my surprise it hadn't. The concrete was completely smooth, leaving no trace that the stop sign had ever been there. I looked over to see if it was back in its rightful place next to the intersection, but it wasn't. Something about this situation was beginning to make me feel uneasy, and that feeling intensified 100-fold when I made my way to the top of the stairs to see the stop sign posted directly in front of my unit's door. Why the fuck was it there? I thought as I walked slowly over to it. As before, I tried to pick it up and once again I couldn't. It was stuck firmly into the concrete as if it had been there since the construction of the building. I stood staring at the stop sign as questions began flooding my mind. Why did someone put it in front of my door? Was it put there at random, or was someone deliberately targeting me? If so, why? I didn't know enough people to have enemies. Did I inadvertently anger one of my neighbors? Why would someone do something this petty as revenge? The more I thought about it, the more the whole situation started to piss me off. After a bad day at work, I really didn't want to deal with this shit. Nevertheless, whoever put it there had made it my problem, and it was now my responsibility to do something about it. Determined not to let it ruin my night, I decided that I would tell the apartment manager about it in the morning before work. I spent the rest of the night getting drunk on cheap beer and giving my thumbs an intense workout. All the while, I couldn't stop thinking about the stop sign. I kept catching myself glancing at the door as if I could sense the stop sign taunting me on the other side of it. I'd bet whoever had put it there was having a good time at my expense. There was probably more than one of them, maybe even a whole group of them, mocking me and talking about what a fucking loser I was. I could imagine their sinister grins as they laughed at how I was so lowly and pathetic that they could do something so ridiculous as put a stop sign in front of my door and there was nothing I could do about it, or how they must have been delighting in my helplessness. I thought as I gritted my teeth. These thoughts festered in my brain, fueled by an ever-increasing flow of alcohol. Eventually my inebriation reached an intensity so great that the thoughts began to boil over until they spilled into action. Before I knew it, I was reaching into my closet to retrieve the baseball bat I kept for protection and marching with purpose towards the door. I stopped and took a long swig of beer before reaching for the door handle, ready to smash the stop sign and anybody that got in my way into a pulp. I would show them that they couldn't mess with me so easily and that there was something I could do about it. With my bat raised high into the air, I flung the door open ready to strike when my heart suddenly plummeted into my stomach. The stop sign was gone. I spent the next few hours gaming until my eyes glazed over, and drinking until the events of the day became a hazy, muddled blur in my mind. I didn't want to think about anything more that night. Not about the stop sign, not about anything. I would surely pay for it the next day at work when I had to nurse a hangover the size of an elephant, but I didn't care. I just wanted to forget all about that night's events. At some point, I must have found my way onto my air mattress and passed out because the next thing I remember was waking up screaming in agony. I looked in horror to see something metal jutting out from my lower abdomen. The holy pattern on the long metal beam looked familiar, and before my eyes gazed upwards to confirm what it was, I already knew. It was the stop sign. Its post had impaled my body completely through like a shish kebab. I tried desperately to pull it out, but I couldn't move it. It had gone straight through my now deflated mattress and was stuck firmly into the floor. Blood poured from the wound, and I knew that if I didn't get help quickly, I was going to bleed to death. Luckily, my phone was within arm's reach, so I grabbed it and frantically dialed 911. The last thing I remember before blacking out was the sound of the operator and me quickly rattling off my address. I woke in a hospital bed with a doctor standing at my side. After asking me a few routine questions, he told me how lucky I was to have survived. He then went on to explain how I got there. Apparently an ambulance along with police had arrived at my apartment within minutes after my call, and the police had busted down my door when I didn't respond to their knocks. They found me in a pool of blood, passed out and barely alive. He said I was lucky because whatever caused my wound had missed all of my vital organs, and if I had waited even a minute longer to call for help, I would have died. The doctor then asked me if I knew what had caused my injury. But when I asked if anyone had seen the stop sign, he looked at me confused. Nothing like that was found at the scene, he assured me. I knew he wouldn't believe me if I told him what I experienced, so I told him that I must have fallen onto something, but that I didn't remember what it was. It's been 2 days since I was released from the hospital. After being there for almost a week, I really didn't want to come back to my apartment, but I don't have any family or friends that I can stay with, so I didn't know where else to go. The whole ordeal has left me terrified, and I haven't slept since I got back. I lost my job for no call, no show, but I don't really care. I'll worry about getting another one later. For now, I need to focus on trying to figure out why that stop sign attacked me. Was it possessed by a demon? Was it a glitch in the Matrix? Was it some kind of warning from the universe? Fueled by coffee and nicotine, I've been searching the internet non-stop for any kind of explanation. I won't give up until I find a way to stop it. I don't have a choice. Nobody would believe me if I told them. They would think I was crazy. Whether I like it or not, I'm completely on my own with this, and I need to figure something out fast. Because a few minutes ago, I looked out my window and saw a stop sign in a place where a stop sign shouldn't be. I fear that it is after me again. And next time it might not miss a vital organ. This happened to me last night and I can't stop thinking about it. I can't sleep and I don't even feel safe, to be honest. Some quick background. My dad is an electrician and I sometimes help him on the weekends if I'm not busy. He got asked to do a job replacing some old lights in a parking lot with new LED ones that are nice and bright. It was for a small store owner who said a lot of shady things were going on overnight in the park that borders his property. Yesterday my dad tells me that he ordered the new light fixtures online and they should be coming a little later on in the day. The lights are high up on a pole, so he asked if I could go with him when the lights show up so that I can hold the ladder. I didn't have anything planned, so sure, why not? Biggest regret of my life so far. I wish I had just stayed home. Can't get this fucking image out of my head. The lights show up around 8 p.m., so we immediately head over to the job. The store is on a pretty busy highway, and just like the owner said, right next to it is a fenced-off park that had no lights in it at all. Not only that, it looked really big, but had almost nothing in it. No swings, no playground, no pond, not even basketball hoops. Just big, open land. The pole we were changing lights on was about 30 feet away from the park. This put me on edge already because we weren't in a nice town and apparently trouble was going on in this park at night. Anyway, about 30 minutes into working, the sun fully went down and it was real dark. I stood there holding the ladder for my dad, who was focused on his work. With nothing else to really do, I just stared into the park. I don't know why, but I just did. That's when I noticed something very strange. A figure pacing back and forth in there. It was so hard to see, but as cars with their headlights on were passing, I could make out the shape of an extremely skinny and pretty tall person just walking back and forth. I have no idea how long this had been going on for, but it was freaking me out now that I saw it. I watched this for about 15 minutes when I started to realize a pattern. The person was taking exactly 12 steps in each direction. None more, none less. 12 steps every single time. The part that bothered me the most was that it didn't look like a person walking. It seemed very robotic, like it was something that was programmed to walk like that. I would have tried taking a video, but I was using a crappy prepaid phone since I accidentally broke my iPhone, and I was waiting for my new one to show up. At first I thought maybe it's a guy waiting for a drug deal or something, but after a while, I didn't think that was the case anymore. Who waits that long for a drug deal, you know? Soon I began to notice something else too. It was trying different styles of walking as if it was in a hurry, then tired, then speed walking, then just a casual, leisurely stroll. But none of them looked normal, all very stiff and robotic. My dad yelled to me to grab the last fixture from his truck, so I quickly grabbed it and came back to the ladder. After handing it to him, the figure was gone from the park. Squinting my eyes, trying to look everywhere, I just didn't see it anymore. As my dad was connecting the final lights, I heard a horrible noise coming from the park. It sounded like someone snoring very aggressively. A sense of extreme panic came over me. I felt my heart pounding. I started looking real hard into the park and immediately I saw it. The figure, standing right up against the fence with one hand gripping through the metal holes. It looked even taller up close. I didn't make a sound. I couldn't. I was paralyzed out of fear at this point. Some cars passed by and dimly lit the face of the figure, which was still hard to see, but it looked like a surprised man. Then it happened. Flash. My dad finished the lights and sent power to them. The figure lit up and I'll never forget what I saw. It was no human being, but looked like something that was trying to replicate a human shape. A skinny, gray-colored thing was standing there. Its face was absolutely horrifying. There were thin, dark red lines running all over it like veins. And its eyes, I still shudder at the thought of them. This thing didn't have eyelids, just huge bloodshot eyes, wide open, staring at me. Instead of having a mouth, there was just a thin slit there, and it didn't have a nose. Long fingers hung through the holes in the fence, and it wouldn't stop staring at me. No blinking or anything, just the terrifying gaze that disgusting sound came from. My muscles were tense and I was frozen. My dad started coming down the ladder. He hadn't noticed the creature yet. Suddenly the thing got on all fours and darted off into the darkness. That was all my dad saw. But he could tell that I'd witnessed something much creepier. He told me it looked like I'd seen a ghost, and honestly I wish I did see a ghost instead of seeing whatever that monster was. I told him everything and he suggested that I call the police. So we get in the truck and that's exactly what I do. I told the dispatcher about the figure and they quickly told me, "Stay on the line, but get out of that area immediately." My dad sped onto the parkway, and after a few more questions, the dispatcher transferred me to an officer who's been on this case. The special officer started asking me a lot of personal information. Name, address, where I work, and things like that. Not much about the incident though, which I found very odd. I was refusing to give this information as I didn't see how it was necessary and kept asking, "Nobody's going to come looking for you, son." Which tipped me off that he was lying because I never mentioned that as a concern. I didn't give any real information since none of this sat right with me. The last thing I saw in the park as we pulled out was a small, blinking blue light in the ground. I've been thinking about going back during the day to see if that light is there, but I'm way too terrified to check it out. I don't ever want to see whatever that was again in my life. I'm still trying to figure out what it was doing. I'm coming to the conclusion that maybe it was trying to practice human behaviors like walking normally. Whatever it was, I'm not comfortable with the fact that it saw me too. I am in my last year of high school. Now, most of my friends and classmates by now have already gotten some kind of a job. Whether that's working at a fast food place, or even helping their own parents with a little business they set up themselves. I was one of the few who just couldn't manage to get a job. Every application I sent out was merely received with the usual copy and paste reply that summed up to, "You weren't chosen." But I had to get money in some way. That's what led me to start making and setting up flyers for a sort of house-sitting service. As old school as it seemed, a lot of my neighbors were usually going away on various trips, and very few of them leave their houses alone, so they'd usually call up a friend or someone they knew to look after things. To be honest, I wasn't expecting to really get any offers for that reason. That was until I got a call from a friend of mine. To keep it brief, they called because he and his parents were going out of town for the Easter weekend, and their usual house sitter had recently tested positive. They almost canceled the trip until they saw my flyer. I accepted the offer and was told to go to his house early in the morning on Friday to give me the basic rundown on what to do and how to take care of things. Thankfully, they were bringing their dog with them for the trip, so I wouldn't need to worry about that. I got to the house at around 6:30 in the morning on Friday. My friend was already waiting for me at the front door of the house to give me the standard tour. To provide a little detail, the house itself was a standard, one-story suburban home. From the front door there was the living room, which held a reclining sand-colored couch facing a large, flat-screen TV. From the living room, straight ahead from the front door led into the kitchen to the immediate right, and a large dining room ahead. The kitchen had a door that led into a laundry room, and the dining room led to 3 other areas. Midway through the dining room, there was an alcove that had 3 doors, or 4 if you counted the towel closet beside the door straight ahead from the alcove entrance. That door led to the guest bathroom, and to the left was a room filled with various creative supplies and materials. To the right was the den, which had a second TV and a computer within. At the end of the dining room were a set of glass doors leading to the back porch. The blinds were half closed, so I was able to see a little bit of the backyard as well. To the left of that was my friend's room, and to the right was his parents' room, or the master bedroom as others would call it. After the tour and a basic rundown on what needed to be done, my friend waved me goodbye before heading off with his parents. I decided to check over each room before heading away myself. They had told me to come by each morning and each evening to check over the house and tidy things up if needed. They left me their phone number in case anything went wrong, although I wasn't expecting anything to really happen. As I was checking the kitchen, my eyes caught a glimpse of what seemed like an envelope of some kind resting in the middle of the granite-countered island at the center of the kitchen. I picked it up, assuming it was just some mail from their other family members, until I saw what was written on the front. In black pen ink, it read, "Additional house rules." I thought to myself that there might be some other things that they may be used to with their usual house sitter that they want me to do as well. I opened up the envelope and unfolded the paper inside. I was not expecting what I was about to read. On the paper, it read as follows. Additional house rules. Rule 1. Arrive and enter the house at the exact same time each morning and evening. No exceptions. Rule 2. Make sure any and all doors of any kind are closed. If you find a door opened and you don't remember opening it, close it and avoid entering that room for at least 5 minutes. Rule 3. If anyone calls the house phone past 7 p.m., do not answer it, even if it is our number. Rule 4. Keep the alcove lights and the master bedroom lights on while you are inside the house. Other lights are optional to keep on. However, if any lights you turned on happen to turn off for any reason, go to the alcove or master bedroom until the lights turn on again. Rule 5. During your evening check, do not leave the house at any time between 7 and 7:30. Past those times, you may leave at any time. Rule 6. Close the blinds to the backyard before doing anything else during the evening. Do not look out into the backyard for any reason. These rules read to me more like some kind of safety manual more than one standard rule set. I honestly thought it was some kind of joke that my friend wanted to play on me before he had left. Regardless, I kept the list and I headed out for the day. I arrived around 6:45 that night for the evening check. I entered the house and began looking around the house for anything out of place, as instructed. The house was brightly lit, as I had turned every light on so I could see. Any doors were closed, so I had to keep them to check inside. It wasn't until I reached my friend's room when I started noticing anything unusual. The door to his room was cracked open, unlike the other doors of the house so far. As I approached the room, I began to hear what sounded like something scratching at the door, and before I got within arm's reach of the door, the light in that room flickered very slightly before abruptly shutting off. I began to back away from the door, just as it began to slowly creak open. I backed into the door leading to the master bedroom and I quickly bolted in, closing the door behind me. The creaking of my friend's room door stopped, and for a good 10 seconds, it was dead silent. The only sound was that of my own slowed breathing. Then I began to hear slow-moving footsteps coming from the room. They slowly approached the door to the master bedroom, of which I was right behind. I looked under the door in hopes I could see who or what it was, but there was nothing. I saw a shadow stretching slightly into the room from under the door as if something was there, yet my eyes saw absolutely nothing. I then began to hear the scratching I heard earlier now coming from behind the door. I had no idea what to do. What could I even do? Whatever it was, I couldn't even see it. Eventually, after about 5 long minutes, the scratching abruptly stopped. The shadow under the door was gone. I hesitated before cracking the door open to peek outside the room. My friend's room was lit up again, and the door was wide open. I checked the door I was cowered behind, and there was no evidence that anything had even been there, let alone had been scratching at the door. I checked the time on my phone. It read 7:05 p.m. I stepped out into the dining room and noticed that the blinds to the backyard weren't closed. I went over to close them, but not before catching a glimpse of the outside. Out in the backyard was a tall, animalistic, shadowed figure. Its appearance almost looked like an 8-foot deer standing on its back legs. It turned its gaze towards mine. On what I assume is its face were 3 bright purple eyes staring right at me. I took no time in closing the blinds the moment it looked at me, hoping I would be safe from whatever it was that was out there. My phone read 7:17 p.m. when I heard the home phone ring. I was about to go over to answer it before I remembered one of the additional rules. Rule 3. If anyone calls the house phone past 7 p.m., do not answer it, even if it is our number. At this point, I was willing to follow these rules to the letter. I'd already had a few close calls due to me nearly not following these strange guidelines, so I let the phone ring on a few more times before it went straight to voicemail, and I let out a sigh of relief. My phone read 7:31 p.m. I decided to start heading home. I was shaken by what I had seen, as I had no clue if it was all some kind of nightmare. But it wasn't a nightmare. It was very real. I hardly got any sleep that night, and by morning, I was running late for the morning check. I drove down to the house and went up to the front door. I was about to unlock the door before I began to hear scratching behind the door. I froze up, not moving. I remembered the first rule: arrive and enter at the same time each morning and evening. I decided to back away to my car. I wasn't sure what was behind the door, but I didn't want to find out. I got into my car and began to pull away. Just before I started driving away from the entrance, I saw those 3 purple eyes from the front window of the house, gazing at me just as I drove off. That evening I arrived at 6:45 to the site of my friend's car in the driveway. Confused, I got out, walked up to the front door, and rang the doorbell. After a minute, my friend answered the door and greeted me with his usual smile. "You guys are back early," I spoke, confused. "Ah, right," my friend answered. "Our family couldn't all make it to my grandparents' Easter dinner, so we had to head home early." I nodded as he handed me the money I was promised. He wished me a good night and was about to close the door before I remembered the note. "By the way," I began to ask, "what was this note about? What's up with your house?" He looked at me confused for a second before he got a look of realization in his eyes. He chuckled to himself before he answered, "I didn't really expect you to take that little joke serious." "What do you mean?" I replied. "I just left that there to mess with you, man." He laughed. "None of that was anything you needed to worry about." As soon as I turned the key, the only thing I was focused on was getting back out. Whenever one hears the word haunted, they typically imagine a house. There's something about being in a large space with more remoteness that presents more opportunity for isolation, and thus fear. However, here I was in a 600 square foot apartment in one of America's densest cities, questioning this archetype. As I slowly pushed my door open, the heaviness of the darkness and warmth seemed inviting, but also insidious. I kept the door open with my back foot and wondered how quickly I could turn the light on before the door has fully closed. Breath held, I quickly darted to the switch on the nearest wall and slapped the light on just before the slam of the door. The lights were on, but the deceitful warmth remained. At this point in the night, I had exhausted every possible option to avoid returning home, but we were in strange times. Bars and clubs closed early due to the pandemic, but the brutal winter weather kept people indoors. I had outstayed my welcome at all of my friends' places and had no choice but to return home. I removed my boots as quickly as I could and snuck towards my bedroom with the hope that this would somehow make a difference. The lights flickered, if only for a moment, but I knew they had been waiting. I turned to the window and saw the reflection of 3 silhouettes behind me, almost waiting to take my snow-covered coat. Their eyes were bright and wide like those of Desert Wanderer, who had stumbled miraculously upon a well. I turned away from the window and dashed through the apartment into my bedroom with my eyes closed, humming as loudly as I could. I reached the furthest window and shoved up, but immediately felt something pulling my shoulder back towards the living room. As I shifted and opened my eyes, they were there. The 3 figures were sitting on the foot of my bed looking down at my sleeping alter self. The thinnest one slowly lifted his hand and slid their sharp finger into my ear, and my alter self began convulsing immediately. I was not sure if I was witnessing reality or a presented illusion of the others, but I couldn't watch any longer. I launched myself through the window onto the fire escape and was immediately greeted by the sharp winter wind. Slamming the window closed behind me, I watched as my alter self rose and tapped on the window with a grin so unnaturally wide it made my stomach turn. I looked away up into the skyline, knowing there was nowhere else to go, but also that I could only stay in the bitter cold for so long. I fumbled through my pocket for my pack of cigarettes and finally found the flimsy paper cartridge in my grasp. As I lit one of the 3 remaining, I knew I would have to go back in and face these demons. If that's what they actually were, well, every drag eased my nerves, brought me a moment closer to this nightmare. But I'm not tired, I complained, climbing the stairs in defeat. I should have predicted the stubbornness, what with it being a school night, but I always push my luck. She really didn't get it when I told her it wouldn't make a difference, and I'd just be awake in bed anyway. Or maybe she knew and didn't care. I'm the adult and you're the child. Mom's word was always final. I brushed my teeth as I was told, kicked clothes off, donned my PJs and leapt into the sheets. The first dive was the enjoyable bit, as I'd wiggle and squirm like a caterpillar, until I found myself cocooned in a tunnel of duvet. After the initial buzz of energy wore off, however, I lay still, staring down past my feet to the opposite side of the room, the ending daylight still making its way softly through my curtains. As boredom set in, my eyes transfixed on the patterns in the tapestry, scanning across the chaos of coils and spirals. Shapes emerged from the yellow and red. It only took a little focus to conjure incredible detail. Pareidolia, I later learned. Some were already familiar to me, having spent long periods stuck in bed through illness or punishment over the years. A dozen faces and characters, a dragon with a hooked mouth, among other obscure figures. There was one scary shape I knew and didn't want to see. Tucked away in the top right corner, a face my autopilot usually blanked out. Unlike many depictions of horror I was exposed to at the time, it wasn't explicitly scary, possessing a gaping mouth or showing large teeth. In fact, To a certain person, it may have even seemed comedic. It appeared as a side profile, a banana-shaped head with a dude's face on it, with a subtle grin and bone structure that reminded me very much of the Joker on old vintage playing cards. I couldn't tell you why exactly, but it really got under my skin. You could even say it made me depressed, like it was whispering silent words of despair into my ears that got louder and louder until I couldn't bear it. Its smile mocked the whole of humanity in its anguish and misery. Since you had to concentrate to truly see it, I'd easily avoided it for years. Though, at this point in time it was strangely alluring. Did it still look the same? My morbid curiosity got the better of me. I scanned the area where I knew it to be, shuffling the patterns around until, eventually, it appeared. After looking at it for a few seconds, I turned away, realizing I'd made a big mistake. As the last rays of setting sun vanished and plunged the room into grainy darkness, I found myself battling a growing paranoia, tossing and turning in an attempt to shake the image from my mind. I buried all of me under the blanket and tried to concentrate on the faint sound of television downstairs. Then I tried sleeping. From the sizzling black depths of my closed eyelids, the Jester's face emerged with striking clarity, illuminated under a spotlight. Like a dodgy animation, it twisted out of the sideways profile and stared at me, like it used to do in my nightmares, growing closer. After it reached an uncomfortable level of intimacy, the picture dissipated into a backdrop of nothingness, leaving me with a horrible, empty feeling in my stomach. I opened my eyes and shuddered. After half an hour of this repeating, I'd had enough. Why was I choosing to wind myself up like this? Sheer boredom. I told my mom I wasn't tired. She should have listened. I hated this so much. I needed to prove to myself once and for all, there was no danger in a curtain. It was just some stupid face I used to creep myself out when I had nothing else to do. It was just... A rustle interrupted the silence. The kind of rustle that curtains made when you slid past them. But what could have slid past? I tensed every muscle in my body into paralysis and letting air escape from my mouth only as tiny soundless wisps. I listened and listened. Was I just freaking myself out more? Reluctantly, I peered through a hole in the sheets over to the window. A dim moonlight bled through the fabric, giving contours to most of the objects. As I tried to trace the whereabouts of the noise, a blurry shadow flickered across the width of the illuminated square. Remembering I was supposed to be asleep, I choked my scream into a squeak, taking a large breath as the back of my head tingled. What the hell was that? I asked myself. The shadow was now resting behind the curtain, x-rayed as an ambiguous embryo in the dim gray. For a few minutes my eyes remained fixed, barely blinking. It refused to move. It didn't even twitch. "What are you?" I called across the dark space, dreading the answer I'd suspected my entire childhood. Masking my fear with aggression, I threw my bed sheets behind me and scrambled to a stand, shuffling sideways along the farthest wall, being careful not to break eye contact. Without hesitation, I flicked the switch, squinting slightly as the sudden brightness illuminated everything. The smudge of darkness vanished. My curiosity now riding more on adrenaline than boredom, I traveled on the balls of my feet towards the curtains, grabbing a cricket bat on my way as a weapon. When I reached the red creases, I paused, wondering whether it really was a good idea for me to be so close to something unknown, or if I should back away and get Mom. But I had to get over this childish fear. I pulled my arm back quietly, waiting for the next wave of adrenaline. Was I really going to do this? And smack the curtains. When they responded with a horrific flapping noise, I turned and ran, slamming the door behind me. "Mom?" I yelled from the top of the stairs, my voice cracking in the middle as I held back a tear. "What?" she yelled back. No doubt confused and annoyed, I was still awake. "There's a bird or bat in my room. Please, can you get rid of it?" I responded desperately. A moment later, she emerged from the dining room carrying a glass bowl she used for baking, climbing the stairs with determination. I opened my door for her in the hall and she walked through. I stayed behind. "Oh, Jesus," she said almost straight away. "That's a big moth. That's fucking giant. I told you." I whimpered, still quite shaken. "Even I'm scared of this one," my mom confessed, shrieking now and then as its loud flaps bellowed through the hall. Eventually I heard a clack. "I've got it. Come have a look," she called excitedly. I peered around the corner. She was kneeling on the floor with the hideous thing as it flapped its dreadful wings against the glass occasionally. "Bloody hell, that thing is huge," I couldn't help but say. She told me to have a look at it while she went and got some card to slide under. Even though the thing was freakishly ugly, it was relieving to finally pin a banal explanation on the whole ordeal. The mystery of the moving shadow was merely an animal, confused and afraid. I knelt down and stared at it for a while through squinted eyes, fascinated yet horrified by its existence. For a moment it stopped flapping and remained still, and I took a second to examine the patterned wings. I shuffled my butt closer and leant right in until my nose was pressing the dome. I didn't see it until the moth climbed upside down, shifting the angle of perception. The same exact face of the vintage Jester that had lived on my curtains for over 10 years, now as a pattern on the bug's wings. Impossible. After doing a double take and squinting extra hard to make sure I wasn't going mad, I ran to my window in disbelief and stretched the material out, frantically searching. It was at that point my mom came in with a card. While she scooped up the insect and carried it off, I realized something that I cannot explain to this day. The face on the curtains had disappeared. First of all, excuse my foul language. So, about 3 months ago, I wanted to get a blood test done at the local urgent care. Because of the pandemic, the local urgent care was moved into the hospital so they could take on more patients. I wanted to get blood work done because I accidentally overdosed myself on zinc supplements. This caused me to have slight zinc toxicity. My hair started falling out. My stomach was in horrifying pain. I was sickly and drowsy a lot. I immediately quit taking the supplement when I found out I was taking too much. I was worried that this zinc toxicity caused serious damage, so I wanted a blood test to see how my vitamin levels were. My friend gives me a ride to the hospital urgent care. I walk inside, signed in with the receptionist at the front desk, and there was a nurse waiting inside the waiting room. She was there to take temperatures and test for signs of COVID. On this particular day, it was literally almost 0 below outside. So I was dressed up, and I was blasting the heat in the truck. I remove my wool cap, and the nurse takes my temperature, and it comes out slightly warm. She immediately starts panicking. She took my temperature again, this time in my mouth. I was still warm. She finally takes my temperature one more time and says something like, "You don't look like you have it. Go on in. Sorry for freaking you out." I reply, "Oh, don't worry about it. You're just doing your job." She let me go and I went into my appointment. About 20 minutes later, I got my blood test papers and was on my way out. A different nurse stops me again in the waiting room while I was on my way out the door. The receptionist is now gone. The nurse says to me, "Sir, I need you to talk with me for a moment in this other room down the hall, and I might need to have you fill out some paperwork and possibly take a blood test." I reply, I just got a blood test. "And what is this about? I have to go now. I have an appointment." She is silent for a second. Then 2 male nurses come up to her. She must have beeped them to come help her. I don't know. I'm a tall guy, 6'4". These 2 guys were about 6 foot and were in normal shape. One of them had gloves on, and I could not make out some object in his other hand. It was shaped like a pen. Looking back, it could have been a needle or a tube. The female nurse whispers something to one of the male nurses, then tells me the same thing. This goes on for about 5 minutes. I kept asking why. What is this for? She would not give me an explanation or answer my questions. I kept telling her I had to leave because I had other appointments. Then the 2 male nurses started asking me questions about random crap that had nothing to do with anything medical-wise. What town are you from? Where do you live? Do you have any hobbies? All the while the 1 male nurse was asking me this stuff, the female nurse is talking on her small radio to someone. One of the male nurses now inches forward a little bit. I was thinking, what the hell did this guy think he was going to do? My paranoia was beginning to kind of overtake me at this point. My fight or flight response was about to kick in. I told the 3 of them, no thank you, and that I was leaving. One of the male nurses was about to put his hand on my shoulder or arm. I back up a little and raise both of my arms up, ready to defend myself. I finally blurted out with a confused and annoying tone, "Alright, don't touch me. I don't know what the fuck is going on. You guys are freaking me out. I'm leaving." The female nurse looks at me. She gets angry and tells me never minded and to please leave the property immediately. I shook my head in confusion and I walked to my friend's truck who was waiting to pick me up. As soon as I get to the truck, I turn around and there are the 3 of them literally following my ass to the truck. I quickly hopped in. My friend was confused as hell. Then the 3 of them just stood there looking at the 2 of us in the truck. My friend quickly drove out of there. A few days later, the urgent care called me to confirm that I got blood work done. I explained this strange incident to them. They said those 3 nurses were not part of the urgent care staff, and that they must have been from the hospital section. They wanted me to file a complaint. I did not. I just let them know to keep a record of it, in case it happens again. Very strange day. I live next to Malibu, California with my son. It's an amazing place to live. Beaches are practically our backyard, and the scenery really is beautiful. But like all things that are good, there always has to be some bad sprinkled in. Malibu has caves. These caves you can explore with a guide, or if you are daring enough, get a group of teenagers to explore with you, and undoubtedly get lost and die. You know, like the plot of all horror movies. I've explored popular caves before and really enjoy seeing the interior of them. I may be a bit of a spelunker, but I will never explore the caves on Sydney Beach. Like all legends, they were stories once. Tales passed on through generations, twisted with a new telling and changed with age. The thing about this legend is that for years it stayed the same. The whisper caves on the edge of Sydney Beach whisper to those who venture close. They whisper invitations and promises, enticing people to enter the pitch-black depths. Like most legends, those people never return. I hadn't lived in Malibu long, so when I first heard of the caves I thought it was a complete load of shit. Whispering caves. It sounds so childish, so I ignored the stories that seemed to circulate through Malibu. That is, until I was walking along the beach with my son. Carson was born deaf. The nerves in his ears didn't fully develop, so no implant or surgery would work. We made do, and he seemed happy. He giggled as we walked through the water. As he played in the sand, my eyes wandered to the caves. It felt as if the darkness was calling me. I would never leave my son unattended. The kid couldn't hear, couldn't speak or scream to me that he was in trouble if I had somehow looked away and he had gotten hurt. I always kept a close eye on him, but this day as I looked at those caves and completely forgot about the 3-year-old 5 feet in front of me, and I walked slowly toward the caves. I walked closer and closer until I was at the mouth of the cave staring into it. Then I heard it. The whispers. They promised all sorts of things. My son would be able to hear again. All my troubles would be gone. I'd have a happy life. No worries. All I had to do, what the caves kept telling me to do, was just walk in. Just walk in. I placed a flip-flop down foot into the cave and started to walk inside. A tiny hand grabbed mine and I looked down. My suntanned son smiled at me and placed something into my hand. A perfect sand dollar, washed of sand and perfectly white. "Come on, Daddy," he signed quickly, pointing to the waves coming in. I glanced back to the cave but was pulled away by my son a second later. There's a part of me that thought I would never praise my son's disability. I would never utter the words, "Thank God my son is deaf." But that night as I lay in bed thinking of the whispered promises, I felt myself thinking exactly that. I wondered if my son was the only one who couldn't hear the whispers. I wondered if I was insane. I wondered what would happen if I had walked inside. A quick Google search got me my answer. 20 people have walked into those caves. One mother whose 5-year-old daughter waltzed in described it as a trance-like state. The mother had turned her back for a moment, turned around and saw her daughter disappear into the cave. She didn't come out. Not one of the 20 people that went in came out. The county had tried to keep people from going in. They had posted signs warning tourists about the caves, cautioned parents to keep a close eye on their young, and prohibited anyone from going inside. The signs served their purpose, though everybody on Sydney Beach wouldn't step 10 feet toward the Whispering Caves. A year after living there, my son went missing. It was a stupid mistake on my part. His cousin was visiting. She was quite older than him at the age of 11. I had left them alone in the backyard to get dinner ready. She had come inside to ask if they could go explore the beach. I gave an offhanded sure. Sydney Beach was popular, and there were tons of locals that knew both my son and my niece. I forgot to mention the Whispering Caves to my niece, who hadn't been told of them. They scampered off, and I finished cooking dinner. I set the sliders on plates and went out to the backyard with a view of the beach to call for them. The beach wasn't far. I could see kids playing in the water fairly well. I had a moment of dad panic when I couldn't spot them among the children. My heart started pounding as I power walked toward the beach. My fingers were going numb with fear as I searched the coastline. Going up to neighbors asking if they had seen the kids. They gave me a sympathetic, sorry. I was close to a full-blown breakdown before a woman called me by my name. Wes. I turned to find my neighbor across the street, Debbie. I ran toward her, taking in her shocked white face and my niece, who she was holding onto with a death grip. Then my eyes diverted to the caves not 20 feet from where they stood. "Where's Carson?" I asked, though my heart knew the answer. He had gone in. I saw them at the cave. I just ran. I grabbed Sadie, but Carson was already inside and I started hearing them. I cut her off. I knew it wasn't her fault. It was mine. I let a deaf 4-year-old and an 11-year-old go out alone toward a cave that has claimed 20 lives. I grabbed Sadie and took her farther from the cave. The lights had switched back on in her eyes, and she was looking around for Carson. "Where's Carson?" "Sadie, what's the last thing you remember?" She pursed her lips. Carson was looking at sand dollars, and then I started looking around and I saw the caves. Then I started walking toward them, and I guess I forgot. She looked back at the caves, then at me. She was completely confused, trying to figure out what happened. I heard them. I felt someone touch me, Carson, but then nothing, and then she grabbed me. She was trying not to cry at the revelation that Carson was gone and she couldn't remember the last 2 minutes. He touched me. Sadie, look at me. She looked at me, tears brimming her eyes. Go back to the house and call your mom and dad, okay? Okay. My brother and my sister-in-law came. I told them the story. My neighbors all heard the story. They baked and gave me food as condolences. The whole neighborhood had heard the sentence, Westcott's boy walked into the caves. And that's all they needed to hear. No one walked out of those caves alive. No one came out. My son was dead. A week. I believed my only son, my only child, was dead for a week. I was numb inside and out. I wallowed in guilt and general depression for a week. I thought about him in there. I knew he was immune to the whispers, but for all I knew, that cave was a maze. He would have gotten lost and either died of dehydration or simple exhaustion. He was in the pitch black, blind and deaf for a week. No way he could have survived. I woke up to a knock at my door at 4 a.m., the 7th day he'd been missing. My brother's family had been staying with me, and Sadie had always been a light sleeper. She woke with me, and we both trudged downstairs to see who it was. The first thing that seemed odd was that I couldn't see anyone out the window of the door. I shook it off as drowsiness. I unlocked the door and opened it. Sadie squealed with delight and started screaming his name. Carson! Carson! Carson came home! She screamed into the neighborhood. It took me a good 10 seconds to fully grasp that my son was alive. My son was standing in front of me. I squeezed him so tight he wiggled in my grasp. I planted kiss after kiss on his head and hugged him again, though slightly less constricting. By that point, porch lights had been turned on and people had come to see the commotion. It's Westcott's boy, Carson. He came back. Rippled down the street. That was how, at 4 a.m. on a Tuesday in May, one street of Malibu, California erupted in cheers and applause. I asked him what had happened later. Everyone wanted to know. At first he didn't do anything, just stared at his hands for a bit. It was bright, he signed. Bright? There was a light that danced. The light showed me the way. He signed. What he was saying made no sense, but I still asked. Did you get scared? He nodded. The bones scared me. The bones? What do you mean? He looked up at me and stared into my eyes. The bones, the people that got lost. You saw skeletons? Carson nodded and picked up a Lego dinosaur. He placed it in his lap to sign, There's a place where you can go 2 ways. The light said to go one way, but the bones pointed another way. He tried to explain. I went to the light because the light made me safe. I followed the light and then I got home. Carson finished, pretending to eat a Lego man with his Lego T-Rex. Buddy, were there a lot of bones? Carson nodded. Lots. I can't count that high, but I can count up to my fingers, he said, showing me all 10 of his fingers. He saw 10 human skeletons in the caves. 10. I don't want to talk about them. The caves are bad, Daddy. Bad. He says, suddenly getting teary-eyed and bursting into tears. I mulled over his words as I hugged him, trying to make sense of what he was telling me. I never did ask him about it like that again. Once in a while he'd come up to me and say the odd sentence like, "The light talked to me," or "the bones pointed down." Weird sentences that didn't make much sense, though they must have made complete sense to Carson. It wasn't until he was 8, years after his disappearance, he came up to me with his tablet and showed me an article. It was a list of all the people who had gone missing in the caves and hadn't come out. 8 children and 12 adults. Carson pointed to the list of children, then back at me with fear in his eyes. Dad, the kids aren't dead. I think I stumbled upon something crazy and I'm just realizing it now. I read somewhere that mazes in ancient times were considered to be portals to different dimensions. I think something like that happened to me when I was a kid. My 7th birthday party was at a Chuck E. Cheese that just opened up. There was the iconic cardboard tasting pizza, a few 2 liters of soda, and a table with balloons. My mom and sisters were there. No friends because no one from my class decided to show up. My mom even gave the invitations to other parents and asked them to show up. Nope, no one showed. But that didn't matter because my favorite thing in the world as a young kid was playgrounds, specifically jungle gyms. All I wanted to do was find my own little spot where the outside world didn't seem to matter. I could have imaginary wars where I had to defend my castle or pretend I'm a king. It was my own space and that was awesome to me as a kid. I'm sure we can all relate. The day of my birthday, I got handed a ridiculous amount of tokens. I think I wasted them all on that coin sweeper game. It didn't matter because they had this huge jungle gym that seemed like stories high. Tubes went around the whole building and even outside of it. There were even kids scrambling all over like ants. I made my way up to the very top and fell deep into my imagination. Just a kid being a kid, I suppose. After defending against some imaginary enemy in my head with finger pistols, I decided to see if I could find my mom through a plastic window somewhere. I scrambled around on my knees in these plastic tubes and found a window, but when I peered outwards with my goofy smile, I saw nothing. The tables were empty, chairs neatly tucked in, machines flashing lights. Where did everyone go? I went into a state of pure panic and spent the next 10 minutes trying to get out. It seemed to turn into a maze. Eventually I got out of the jungle gym and frantically searched with my eyes for anyone. No, nothing. No one was there. I went over to the front windows and it was dark outside. No cars, just dull street lights and pure silence. For some reason in my head, I thought I was dead. The only way to confirm this, in my 7-year-old mind, was to see myself in a mirror and make sure that I was still here. I ran to the bathroom and confirmed that I was, in fact, not a ghost. I sat there trying to not have a complete meltdown. Suddenly the door swung open and a man in a black tuxedo walked in. I stared at him in his dark eyes and he simply said, "You're not supposed to be here." He touched the top of my head and as I flinched, and then opened my eyes again, he was gone. I sat there in fear for what felt like ages before I had the courage to open the door. I was immediately greeted with a Cotton Eye Joe at max volume and saw the place was alive again. My mom was sitting patiently at our table and I hugged her. That was the best birthday gift I've ever got. Never went into any more of those jungle gyms and I absolutely do not venture into any mazes. Has anyone had this happen to them? I pulled the curtain aside with a shaky hand and gazed outside, and as I had feared, he was still there. He was standing on the sidewalk with the goddamn sign. The one that said the end is near. The baton he had stapled to it was resting against his shoulder, while the brown rectangular cardboard with the cheery, feel-good message was hovering just above his head. He was staring straight at me, as if he had known that I was hiding behind the thick cloth. My free hand was waving at me like a windscreen wiper on a car only capable of swinging 15 degrees in either direction, and on his face was the most bone-chilling smile I'd ever seen. I quickly let go of the curtain and he disappeared from view. Then I leaned forward and took half a dozen deep breaths to try to calm myself. God, it couldn't be long now. I just hoped it would be painless and over and done with quickly. I tiptoed over to the kitchen on legs that felt like they were about to give up on me at any second, and managed to pour myself a cup of coffee. but the hand that lifted the cup was shaking so badly that I had to put it back down again and let it sit for a few minutes before I made a second attempt. Kathy had already left, and I was the only one remaining in the house. Her shift started at 7, and she had got up early in order to beat the rush hour traffic. I had been standing at the window in the exact same spot when she walked over to her car, peeked out through a tiny gap in the curtains, and the old man had been standing where I saw him less than 5 minutes ago, doing the exact same thing, holding the sign, waving his hand, and smiling at me. The thought made me shudder. Kathy hadn't noticed him, despite having walked right past him to get to her car that was parked out on the street. I had to admit it wasn't all that strange, given that I was the only one who could actually see him. He was thin and extremely tall. If I had to venture a guess, I'd say close to 7 foot. His complexion was that of an albino, and his silk-like straight hair that clung to his scalp like glue was as white as the snow that still blanketed the little patch of grass next to the footpath leading up to the house. And then there was the grin. The uncanny grin that made him look like a psycho that had just escaped from a lunatic asylum. It covered almost half of his face and made him look like the devil himself. It had started 2 weeks ago when I opened up an email and watched the 15-second video clip attached to it. It was shot at some cemetery in God knows where. It was dark, but the flash on the camera was turned on, and I could clearly see the big hole in the ground and the dirt that had collected in 2 large piles on either side of it. But I had quickly pushed those images aside, and my attention had been drawn toward the black tombstone just beyond the hole. It had a name written on it, but it had been blurred out, and I was thus unable to read it. After having watched the clip twice, I called Kathy over to come and check it out, but she had just shook her head and given me a quizzical look. "It's just static," she said. "Why on earth do you want me to look at that?" I stared at her open-mouthed, wondering if she was pulling my leg, but stopped trying to convince her that there was actually something there, when she got angry a couple of minutes later, slammed her hand down on the table, and stormed out of the room. Subsequently, I didn't mention the other clips I received, one every evening at exactly 8 o'clock, nor did I mention it to her last Wednesday when the old man appeared in the clips, standing behind the tombstone, waving the sign and flashing me his eerie, sick grin. My hand had finally calmed down enough for me to lift the cup up to my lips, but I immediately dropped it when I heard someone start thumping the front door. It hit the floor with a loud bang, and hot coffee sprayed all over the linoleum and onto the bottom of the kitchen cabinets. I didn't move. I just stood there looking at the door, opening leading out of the kitchen like a deer caught in oncoming headlights, praying that the thumping would stop. But it didn't. It continued with an almost rhythmic-like precision. Thump, thump, thump. A full minute must have passed before I dared to take a step forward, and as I did so, I felt a sliver of ceramic sink into my foot. I swore out loudly, looked down, and saw blood oozing out from underneath it. Then I felt a sharp pain as the nerves began sending their signals to the pain receptors in my brain. I grimaced and lifted it up, and slowly pulled out the white, pyramid-shaped piece and embedded there. Then I removed the sock, reached behind me and grabbed a tea towel from the countertop and pressed it against the wound. And all the while, I could hear the loud thumping drifting in from the front of the house. I managed to wrap the towel around the foot and started limping out into the hallway. The pain was shooting up my leg and my heart was pounding out of control in my chest. And when I saw the door vibrating in its frame like a massive diaphragm in some oversized loudspeaker, I almost wet my pants. What the fuck was I supposed to do if he managed to get inside? But despite my fear, I was able to continue walking towards the door. And when I got there, I put my eye up against the spy hole and looked outside. It was the old man. The sign was still resting against his shoulder and the grin was stretched across his face, but as big as it had been 5 minutes earlier. I could see his hand slamming against the door like it was his best buddy, and he was giving him free high fives. I stepped back like I had just been hit by an electric current, not knowing what to do next. But as I was standing there, watching the door being pounded, a thought entered my mind, and I threw myself around and hobbled into the master bedroom where I got the gun out from the drawer on the bedside table. Why hadn't I thought of the gun before? It was the first thing that sprang to my mind whenever I thought I heard strange noises in the house during the night. I quickly established that it was loaded and made my way back to the front door again. And that's when the thumping stopped. I tensed and raised the gun, moving slowly toward the door. To say I was on edge would be the understatement of the century. I was sweating like a pig and shaking like a junkie in desperate need of a hit. Then when I was 5 feet away, I stopped and listened. But the only thing I could hear was my heart racing away, and my breath going in and out of my lungs at lightning speed. Had the old man decided to leave? Had he figured out that I wouldn't give up without a fight? The sweat had started to drip into my eyes, and I quickly wiped it away with my sleeve. The gun was shaking in my hand, but I was able to keep it aimed straight ahead. I don't know how long I stood there for, but it must have been a couple of minutes at least. It was still dead quiet outside the door, so I decided to head back over to the window and see if the old man had returned to the spot on the sidewalk. I lowered my gun and turned around, careful not to make any sudden movements. But as I was about to make my way over, the thumping started again, and this time it sounded like he was using a goddamn battering ram. I reacted instinctively. I spun around, aimed the gun straight ahead, and emptied the entire magazine through the door. The shots sounded like firecrackers going off right next to my ears, and after it was over, I thought I could hear church bells tolling inside my head. Then I stood absolutely still and stared at the 10 pencil-sized holes that was now adorning the door. And it wasn't until I felt my phone vibrating in my back pocket that I lowered the hand holding the gun and watched the weapon drop down to the floor. I turned my head, got the phone out, and saw that I had just received an email. I stared at the screen wide-eyed and barely registered that my right thumb had clicked on the attachment. It was another clip from the cemetery. The old man was standing behind the tombstone, but unlike the other times, I could actually read the name on it. My heart skipped a beat when I read it. It was Kathy's name, and below it, written in gold lettering, was the date of death. It was today. I was completely dumbfounded and felt the nausea hit me like a pressure wave. Had all this been about Kathy? Was she the one that was going to die today and not me? Then my phone started vibrating again and I looked down at it. I had just received a new voicemail message. I lifted the phone slowly to my ear and listened to it. It was from Kathy. "Hi, Tim. I've just come down with a nasty headache and I decided to come back home. I forgot to bring my keys, so you are going to have to let me in. See you soon." The message had been recorded 30 minutes ago, but somehow just showed up on my phone. Then a horrible thought entered my mind, and I felt my blood rush down from my brain to my feet. If the message had been sent 30 minutes ago, she should have been home by now. The phone slipped out of my hand and landed on the carpet with a soft thud. Then I sprang forward, jerked open the door, looked down, and screamed. My name is Edmund, and this is my story. The year was 1907 when I sold my soul. I was only 5 years old when I made that deal. The demon became my most dearest friend. I know what you must be thinking. Why is a demon your friend? Well, because he helped me to become stronger, as well as being a relative of mine. The demon's name was Sirius, but he made me do things that I will regret for the rest of my life. I killed my entire family in the dead of winter one night. I did it to become stronger. The price that I paid for that was going to an insane asylum. Reminder, I was only a 5-year-old boy. In the asylum, I was put through the most horrific torture any insane person can go through. I won't go into detail. I'd rather forget, but everything they did to me didn't hurt. The demon made me numb to the pain and would heal my wounds. I was still a healthy boy even though I was very malnourished. In the asylum, I met a girl named Adeline. She was special like me. So were 3 others. Their names are Troy, Christopher, and Katerina. They became my first real friends. Then I lost them one day in a fire. I was the only survivor. I lost my darling Adeline. During my time in the asylum, I fell in love with Adeline. But then, all in a moment, I lost her. I lost them all. I lived on searching for them, so I knew they would come back one day. And they did. Well, not Adeline. She was still gone, but I waited for her to come back. I waited for a century to meet her again. You must be wondering how old I am. Well, I am 118 years old and still look like I'm in my early 20s. Anyways, I did meet my darling Adeline again. My heart was filled with joy. I had all of my friends back. But I still didn't have my family. I've always wondered if they would forgive me. I wouldn't forgive myself. I wish I could go back, but what price will I pay to go back? Opening my eyes, I see a familiar room. Sitting up, I see that I'm in my old room. Tears start to fill my eyes. Wait, my right eye. It's back. I touch my eye. The eye I cut out over a century ago. The tears roll down my cheeks. I look around and everything is where I left it. Scanning the room, I look over to my night table. The red book is gone. I panic and start to frantically look for it. Throwing the covers off of me, I notice that my arms aren't covered in bandages anymore. There are no more scars, just my pale white skin. Master, what's going on? I asked, but no answer came. I called out again, still nothing. I panic more as I get onto my feet and head to the secret compartment under the floorboards. Getting to the floor and lifting the floorboard up, the book isn't there either. My heart drops and I stand only to fall down again. Master, please. I whimper as I hit the floor with a loud thud. I pull at my tangled mess of brown hair. Where is my master? Just then my door opens. A familiar, sweet, soft, caring voice says, Edmund, dear, are you all right? I look up, tears still streaming down my face. I see my mother alive, standing in my doorway of my room. She's still as beautiful as ever, and she still had that worrying look on her face. In a blur, I get up and I hug her, hugging her tightly as if she was going to disappear again. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I repeated over and over again. I didn't want this to be a dream. Was it? Or is it real? Edmund, what's wrong? My mother questioned again, hugging me back. I didn't want to let go. It felt like I was a kid again. Being held by my mother again. Felt like a dream. I can't let it fade away. In countless dreams, she's faded away from my sight. Eventually, I managed to squeak something out. What year is it? I let go of her and look into her pale blue eyes. She had a confused look on her face. I needed to know what the year was. It's 1918, Edmund, she said, wiping the tears away from my reddened cheeks. My eyes widened in shock. How can it be 1918? The asylum burnt down that year. Adeline. Once again, I stumble back and fall to the ground. Boy, what are you doing in there? Said a male voice from behind my mother. She steps back to reveal my father with his arms crossed. I get up and walk towards him. I stare into his green orbs, the same color as mine. Then I hug him like I did my mother. He was taken aback about my sudden affection towards him. Edmund, what's going on with you? My dad asked me in a questioning tone. I look up out of the hallway and I see Peter. I let go of my dad and went over to Peter. I take him into a tight hug. Mother, is everything all right with him? He asked our mother. I don't know, Peter. She said, walking into the hallway with my father. How can they be all alive? So many questions are going through my head. Why is Big Brother Edmund crying? Questioned a little voice similar to my mother's. I look up and see my twin Edward and William standing with a little girl. Edward's hair was no longer white, but a dark brown like mine. William still looked the same. The little girl looks just like my mother. Light brown hair, but with green eyes. I let go of Peter and stare at my brothers. Edward? Will? My voice breaks and the little girl walks up to me. I look down at her and she hugs me. I have a little sister? I asked them. Yes, Edmund, you've always had a little sister, said my mother from behind me. She placed her hand on my shoulder. I look at her and then back at my new little sister. But all of you died in 1907 when I was 5 years old. I killed all of you. I choked down. How can you guys be alive? I watched all of you die. Edward was taken at birth. He's not supposed to be here. None of this makes sense. The girl lets go of me and steps back. William grabs her by the arm and pulls her to him. Everyone was looking at me like I was crazy. Even my mother steps away from me. Edward walks toward me with his hands up. Ed, calm down. We're alive. We just had a bad dream, he said, placing his hands on my shoulders. I shook my head. It wasn't a dream. I pushed him away from me and ran down the stairs. William and my sister moved away as I did, running down familiar stairs and down the hall, then out the front door. The cool autumn breeze fills my lungs as I run. I ran down the path and out onto the road. Somehow I knew which way to go. I still remember the way to the asylum, even though I couldn't see the way. I don't know how long I ran for. Maybe hours. It was twilight and there was a light drizzle of rain. And finally I made it to where the Blackwater Asylum stood. But the only thing that stood was a skeleton of a burnt-out building. The once gray concrete walls were now in ashen black. I fell to my knees and just stared up at the building that was once my prison of hell. Fresh tears fell from my reddened eyes. Before I knew it, I was screaming Adeline's name. I needed to know what happened to her and the others. I laid my head onto the damp, cool ground. I start pounding my right fist into the damp earth, my throat burning from me screaming out for them. I sit back up and my eyes wander to the edge of the woods. At the edge of the clearing, I see 4 gravestones. In a trance-like state, I walk toward the gravestones. Engraved in the stones were the numbers of 357, 358, 359, and 360. The cell numbers of my dear friends. The only one missing was mine. I fall in front of the grave of 357. Adeline's cell number. My mind went blank, and before I knew it, I was digging in the cold, wet earth. I kept digging and digging, screaming for Adeline. I dug till I hit something hard and smooth. Digging around it, I noticed that it was head-shaped. Picking it up, it was a skull, the size of a child. My hands started to shake as the child-sized skull laid in my hands. Then it started to downpour. I stared at the skull as the rain fell around me. More and more tears fell from my eyes. My heart and soul shattered. My sweet, darling Adeline was dead. She was gone. I held the skull close to my chest. I screamed out for her. She couldn't be gone. This was the price that I would pay if I didn't sell my soul. I would lose the love of my life. Take me back. Just let me go back. I screamed towards the blackened sky, as the rain pelted me with its icy sheets. Then I heard a voice from behind me. This is what you wanted, right? To have your family back? Said a voice of a child. Turning around and standing in front of me was a 5-year-old me. He had a sad look in his eyes that saw many deaths and sorrows. I just stared into those eyes. This is the price you will pay, but you have your family back. Do you still want to go back? Said the younger me. The question made me look back down at the skull. I wanted to stay with my family, but at the same time, I wanted to be with Adeline. One thing to understand, I did want to stay with my family. That would mean I would lose everyone else. I could live a day with my family, but I can't live another day without Adeline. I know what decision I will make. Take me back, I said to my past self. I still held the skull in my arms as I looked in the green orbs of younger me. Younger me nodded his head and lifted his hand to my head. He placed it gently on my forehead and the rain stopped. He closed his eyes and I closed mine. Then I woke up. It was really degrading growing up having a younger sister who excelled in sports, and I was cursed with having a complete lack of coordination. As my sister made all of the local newspaper headlines for her athletic prowess and went on Friday night dates with the high school quarterback, I would sit alone in my bedroom trying to make lifelike animatronics from whatever spare parts I could find around the neighborhood. It was hard to not be viewed by my father as a disappointment, especially when Dad would get all excited when baseball season would be starting and he thought this would be the year that I would hopefully make the school's baseball team, but the only thing that would happen is I would accidentally get a black eye from not being able to catch his baseball throws and eventually be cut from the school's team. I was just different. I lacked social skills to the point where every teacher and guidance counselor suggested that I get tested for autism or Asperger's syndrome. However, my parents had an old school mentality and wanted me to adapt to the world on my own, so I never got any services or help. The one thing that I appreciated about my parents growing up is when they took our family to Disney World twice a year. As a young boy, I was enthralled with the animatronics that multiple rides had to offer. My mom always said that watching me on rides such as the Pirates of the Caribbean or It's Small World were the only times in my life that she saw me happy. In high school, I might have been a social outcast, but I did excel in math and was taking advanced calculus, which got the attention of Penn State, which is nationally known for their engineering programs, and in particular, animatronics. So when I received my acceptance letter during my senior year of high school, my mother came rushing in my room when she heard me yelling with excitement, which she had to that point only ever heard my sister do 1,000 times before when celebrating a field hockey or softball win. But she never heard me express such emotion. So I went off to Happy Valley in central Pennsylvania and placated to my strong points of not socializing and doing nothing more than studying. As others would love to drink and smoke, I would love to hang out in the engineering lab and tinker with animatronics all night. So much so that I came really close to graduating with a 4.0 GPA. I got a 3.99, which was unheard of for an American student at Penn State in my animatronics engineering program. My hard work had finally paid off as Disney offered me a position on their Imagineering animatronics department, where I would specifically be working on the It's a Small World attraction ride under the chief engineer, Bob Stone. Bob said he was really impressed with my humbleness considering my near 4.0 GPA, which I think he confused with my complete social awkwardness. Bob was a really nice guy who was short and obese and kind of looked like Mario from the Super Mario Nintendo game. But Bob had gray hair, and I think his ancestors were from Germany. The following July after graduating, my extended family had a 4th of July get-together, where my father introduced me to everyone I've met a million times over the years as my son. He was just so proud of me that someone at the party was talking about Napoleon and my father interjected and said that, "Did you know my son got a job at the prestigious Imagineering animatronics department at Disney World?" Where each person at the party must have heard 5 times that night. I guess to my dad, my new job was equally as good as making it into the Cooperstown's Baseball Hall of Fame. Bob looked to be in his 60s and was highly regarded as bringing It's a Small World into the 21st century while still maintaining its original ambience. Bob is considered a legend for doing so because Disney has a way of replacing old, stale rides with the newest, best things. Anyone who had been to the Magic Kingdom in the early 1980s can attest to this, or even more so to Disney's Hollywood Studios, where nearly the whole park has recently been revamped. Bob showed me the ins and outs of all the lifelike child animatronics and the countries that they represented. Every movement had to be synchronized precisely, and Bob's intensity level would go up each morning right before the ride would open to the public. I viewed Bob really as being married to his job, and he would jokingly refer to the child animatronics as his own children. Bob was so invested in his work that he would even personally take plane rides to the different representative countries to really get a feel for their cultures. As the months went on, Bob started to build a respect for my dedication, so much so that he wanted me to join him for a weekend trip to Romania to get a feel for the children and their culture, where Bob would actually stay the remainder of the week in Romania, and I would go back home to Disney World on Sunday night. This was considered a big compliment from Bob, because it meant that he needed me at the park in case any issues arose, where I could possibly step in and address the issue. We took a red-eye flight to Romania, and when we arrived, I was really impressed with their local customs. Being that Bob was from Disney, he had built up a rapport with some of the local officials, where they even put on a celebratory dance on for us, similar to the one that occurs on the It's a Small World ride. The kids even wore almost the identical outfits to the ones at Disney World. I knew the Romanian officials really just wanted our Disney money, especially when I got the sad opportunity to tour a local impoverished orphanage where the small children weren't afforded the basic necessities in life. It was so sad that I couldn't wait to leave on Sunday night and go back to Florida. I really had a special appreciation for Bob being able to make all of these trips over the years and even staying for the remainder of this week. I arrived back at Disney early Monday morning. Unfortunately, I noticed one of the Russian animatronic children were starting to break down. I relayed the information to Bob when I called him the following day, where he was disappointed but joked that it figures because coincidentally, I have an upcoming trip to Russia. Bob got back from Romania, and everything was status quo at Disney. Bob said that he feels rejuvenated with being engulfed in the country's culture, as he worked throughout the night to update some of the Romanian child animatronics. I might be on the autism spectrum, but Bob was 10 times more so with his unwavering focus. Where I would work 10 hours, Bob would work 20 hours a day, and he was more than twice my age. Even though the Russian animatronic needed more acute attention, I learned not to question the genius in Bob's methods. Bob asked me to get the entire attraction ready for the next morning, and when morning came, I was so impressed with the updates that Bob had made to the Romanian animatronics. The only exception was when I stood below one of the Romanian animatronics and I noticed it was leaking a burgundy-type fluid, which I only noticed because it got on my white shirt. I frantically called Bob because I couldn't fix the leak, and on his 2 hours of sleep he rushed down and fixed the fluids that were leaking from the gear suspensions, as Bob explained it. Bob was considered an ultimate master at his craft, and I still needed more time for Bob to teach me everything about the mechanics. Bob eventually went to Russia, and I didn't want to experience the same sadness again as I did in Romania, so I stayed home this time. When Bob was gone, I had accidentally broke one of the specialty tools for the animatronics, and I had to go to the Pirates of the Caribbean ride for a replacement. While I was there, one of the long-term engineers was amazed that I didn't quit or disappear. He told me that none of Bob's assistants have worked out over the years, and he saw the last young guy yelling and screaming before he literally ran off. I was kind of taken aback by all of this because maybe it's my personality, but Bob hasn't been mean or disrespectful towards me at all since I started working under him. When Bob came back to Disney from Russia, he had the same vigor as when he returned from Romania. He worked feverishly when the ride was closed at night to update the Russian animatronics. So much so that all of his hard work, unfortunately his obesity-related diabetes that his body couldn't handle, actually caused him to have a minor stroke and he had to be hospitalized. This was shocking because he hadn't called out sick in over 40 years. This now put a lot of stress on me because I was temporarily doing Bob's chief engineering position for the ride, and I don't know everything that there is to know yet. As I was doing all the tests for the rides the next morning, something was off with one of the Russian animatronics, where the one machine wouldn't stay upright. I started to panic because I only had 2 hours before the ride would open to the public. I was turning and twisting the thing so much that I was afraid that I was only making the animatronic worse. I really felt like a fish out of water compared to Bob and his expertise. I got so desperate that I reluctantly called Bob at the hospital. Bob said in a weak voice that he was actually glad that I called, and he instructed me to use special hydraulic fluid in one of his toolboxes that was in a small needle-filled syringe, and for me to inject them into the faulty Russian machine. So I gathered the syringes and went back to the machine. I was probably about 15 feet from that female Russian faulty animatronic, where my mind and my feet were both telling me something wasn't right, and I started to walk very slowly. Because what my eyes were looking at reminded me of when my then toddler cousin was put on a horse pony by herself and she started to weep uncontrollably. Now, unbelievably, this machine is doing the same thing. I just stood there with this needle syringe in my hand, trying to block out the deepest, most unfathomable reason why this machine was shedding tears. My mind was slowly drifting back to when Bob and I went to Romania and how Bob paid close attention to this young, black-haired boy who had piercing brown eyes. My mind was trying to black out that same resemblance of the Romanian boy at the orphanage and the machine that was leaking gear fluid, and how my naive self at that time said, "No, it can't be," and just returned to work. So I just looked at this poor Russian animatronic girl, and I remembered how proud my dad was of me during the 4th of July party, where prior to that, I had been nothing more than a complete disappointment to him my whole life, and how Bob would fire me if I didn't inject this poor Russian girl. So with the needle syringe in my hand, I looked one more time at the weeping girl, and I was just overtaken with emotions, and I started crying for what the unspeakable horrors this child had faced. Then I called Disney's park manager and told her that It's a Small World won't be operational today. My eyes surveyed all the It's a Small World children, and I said, "Heavens no." As I glared out at the hundreds of little children's eyes crucified on metal frames for nothing more than the amusement of mostly unbeknownst middle-class Americans. Not really knowing what to do, I called a local monastery up and explained to a nun that I don't know what the monster Bob did to those kids, but rather than have them viewed as freak shows on the news, if the nuns instead could handle the situation for me. Where it turned out the nuns actually knew one of Disney's board members who helped arrange for transportation to house the kids in one of their larger monasteries, which would be quietly funded by Disney to avoid bad press. That night I had the dubious job of releasing all of the bolts and mechanisms that were holding the children in place. Bob had whiskey in one of his toolboxes, so considering I never drank a drop of alcohol my whole life, I was plastered by the time. I had all these kids released and laid out on the floor. I must have said sorry several thousand times to the kids as I was releasing them. I learned that Bob had actually went to medical school in Mexico prior to becoming an engineer, where he learned how to be a surgeon. So those kids were basically half machines by the time Bob was done with them, and he would inject them with embalming fluid and adrenaline to keep their smiling faces. I put the actual old vintage animatronic machines that were in storage back in place of the real kids. Then I paid Bob a visit at the hospital. Because of Bob's obesity, he was a diabetic and had spare insulin in his toolboxes, which I brought with me to the hospital. Thankfully for me, Bob had his own room in the hospital at the end of the hallway away from the nurse's station. When I got into Bob's room, he was sedated as the nurse earlier had said, from the diagnostic procedure he had earlier in the day, so he didn't even notice when I came into the room. I took away his nurse call bell light and I said, "Bob, I know you hired me because you thought I was socially awkward and you thought I would just be your lackey and then would do whatever you told me to do." Bob kind of looked at me with his eyes half open and looking like he was going to fall asleep. Then I said, Bob. I released all the kids. Can you believe that? He then perked up a little and looked angry. I then took the needle-filled syringes of Bob's fast-acting insulin and injected him with 2 vials worth that would put down 10 horses. He was too sedated to put up a fight, and he slowly drifted out of consciousness. I waited 10 minutes until he was completely blue that I went to the nurse's station and said, "There's something wrong with Bob. He doesn't look good." After Bob was pronounced dead, I called Universal Studios to see if they were hiring because the thought of that weeping girl and the rest of those kids will never get out of my mind.